Michael Torres had seen it all in his 20 years as a pharmacist at Midtown Pharmacy in Atlanta. Fake prescriptions from drug seekers, dangerous drug interactions that doctors missed, elderly patients confused about their medications, insurance nightmares, angry customers demanding medications they couldn't have. He'd developed instincts, a sixth sense for when something wasn't quite right, a prescription that seemed off, a patient whose behavior didn't match their medication, red flags that most people wouldn't notice. It was a Tuesday afternoon, relatively slow, when the young woman walked in. Michael noticed her immediately, not because she was memorable, but because she was trying so hard to be invisible. She was maybe late 20s, wearing a long-sleeved shirt despite the Atlanta heat, sunglasses inside the pharmacy, and a baseball cap pulled low. She clutched a prescription in her hand, her knuckles white from gripping it so tightly. Michael watched as she approached the counter, her eyes darting around nervously like she was checking if anyone was watching her. "I need to fill this," she said quietly, sliding the prescription across the counter without making eye contact. Michael picked it up and felt his stomach drop. The prescription was for a massive dose of sedatives, Ambien, 90 tablets of 10 milligrams each. The dosage and quantity were technically within legal limits, but barely, and the prescribing doctor was one Michael didn't recognize. "Can I see your ID, please?" Michael asked, keeping his voice professional and calm. The woman, Jessica Morgan, according to her driver's license, looked even more nervous. "How long will this take?" "Just a few minutes to process and fill," Michael said. "I need to verify some information." "Is this a new prescription from a new doctor?" "Yes," Jessica said quickly. "Too quickly. I'm traveling and my regular doctor isn't available. I need sleep medication. I have insomnia." Michael nodded, but his instincts were screaming. He entered the prescription into the system and checked her patient history. Jessica had no previous prescriptions for sleep medication, no history of insomnia treatment. This was a first-time prescription for a powerful sedative in a massive quantity. He looked up at Jessica again. She was fidgeting, pulling at her sleeves, constantly checking her phone. When she reached up to adjust her sunglasses, Michael caught a glimpse of a bruise on her wrist, quickly covered as she pulled her sleeve down. "Miss Morgan, I need to call and verify this prescription with the doctor. It's standard procedure for controlled substances from new prescribers. It'll just take a moment." Jessica's face went pale. No, please don't call. I really need this medication. I haven't slept in weeks. Please just fill it." "I'm required to verify controlled substance prescriptions," Michael said gently. "It's the law. I'll just be a quick call." "Please," Jessica whispered, and Michael saw tears forming in her eyes. "Just fill it, please. I need it today." Michael stepped away to the pharmacy office and dialed the doctor's number listed on the prescription. It rang 3 times before going to voicemail, an automated message with no personalized greeting. He hung up and called the Georgia Medical Board to verify the prescriber's DEA number. It checked out. Dr. Robert Patterson was a licensed physician in Atlanta, but when Michael called the clinic address listed, the receptionist said Dr. Patterson no longer worked there and had moved his practice. Everything was technically legitimate, but nothing felt right. Michael returned to the counter. Jessica was crying now, trying to hide it behind her sunglasses. "Miss Morgan, I'm having trouble reaching Dr. Patterson. I need to ask you some questions. Are you currently being treated for any medical conditions?" "No." "Have you ever taken sleep medication before?" "No." "Do you have a history of sleep disorders or insomnia?" "I told you I can't sleep. I need this medication." Michael made a decision. "I'm sorry, but I can't fill this prescription today. The dosage concerns me, and I haven't been able to verify it with the prescriber. I can..." "Please." Jessica's voice cracked. "You don't understand. I need this. He said you'd fill it. He said it was legal. Please, I'm begging you." Those words, "he said you'd fill it," sent chills down Michael's spine. This wasn't about sleep medication. "Who said I'd fill it?" Michael asked carefully. Jessica froze, realizing her mistake. "I'm fine," Jessica said, but she was backing away from the counter. "Never mind, I'll go somewhere else." She turned to leave, and Michael made a split-second decision that would change both their lives. "Wait," he called. "Miss Morgan, please wait." Jessica stopped but didn't turn around. Michael came around the counter, keeping a respectful distance. "I've been a pharmacist for 20 years, Michael said softly. "I've seen a lot of things, and what I'm seeing right now concerns me." "That prescription isn't for you, is it?" Jessica's shoulders started shaking. She was crying openly now. "It's okay," Michael continued. "You're not in trouble, but I need to know, are you safe? Is someone forcing you to get this medication?" Jessica slowly turned around. Behind the sunglasses, Michael could see her eyes were red and swollen. "If I don't come back with these pills, he'll hurt me. He said he'll kill me this time. Please, I just need the medication." Michael felt his blood run cold. Who will hurt you? My boyfriend. He wants the pills. He's been using my ID to get prescriptions from different doctors. He found someone who would write this one. He's waiting outside in the car. If I don't come out with the pills. Her voice trailed off, but Michael understood. He glanced toward the pharmacy windows. Sure enough, there was a man sitting in a car in the parking lot, staring at the pharmacy entrance. Does he know you're talking to me? Michael asked. No, he thinks I'm just waiting for the prescription, but it's been too long. He's going to get suspicious. Michael thought quickly. Okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to go back behind the counter and act like I'm filling your prescription. You're going to sit in those chairs over there like you're waiting. I'm calling the police. They'll handle this discreetly, but you need to trust me. Can you do that? Jessica nodded, terror and hope warring in her expression. Michael returned to the pharmacy counter and picked up the phone, keeping his movements casual like he was just doing normal work. He dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? This is Michael Torres at Midtown Pharmacy on Peachtree Street, Michael said, keeping his voice professional and calm. I have a situation. A woman is here being coerced by someone in the parking lot to obtain controlled substances illegally. She's told me he's threatened to kill her. The suspect is currently in a vehicle watching the pharmacy entrance. I need police here immediately, but discreetly. The operator asked for more details. Michael provided descriptions, the license plate of the car outside that he could see from the window, and Jessica's information. Officers are being dispatched, the operator said. Keep the woman inside and safe. Do not engage with the suspect. Michael hung up and began actually preparing a prescription bottle, not with sedatives but with something harmless that looked similar. If Brandon came in demanding to know what was taking so long, Michael would have something to show. 10 minutes passed. Jessica sat rigidly in the waiting area, her phone buzzing constantly. She ignored it, though Michael could see the panic growing on her face with each message notification. 15 minutes. Brandon's car hadn't moved, but Michael could see him getting agitated, checking his phone, looking toward the pharmacy entrance. Finally, Michael saw two unmarked police cars pull into the parking lot from different directions, blocking Brandon's vehicle. Plainclothes officers approached quickly. Brandon, realizing what was happening, tried to start his car and drive away, but he was boxed in. Through the pharmacy windows, Michael watched as officers pulled Brandon from his vehicle, his face contorted with rage as he struggled against them. Jessica saw it too and collapsed into sobs of relief and terror. Detective Lisa Chen arrived 20 minutes later and asked Michael to close the pharmacy for an hour so she could interview both him and Jessica privately. In the pharmacy's back office, Jessica told her story. She'd met Brandon Walsh 2 years ago. He'd seemed perfect at first, charming, successful, attentive, but gradually, he'd become controlling. He'd isolated her from friends and family. He'd moved into her apartment, then taken over her finances. He'd started getting violent when she didn't do exactly what he wanted. 6 months ago, Jessica said, her voice shaking, he started making me get prescriptions for pain medications and sedatives. He'd take me to different doctors, ones he'd found, who would write prescriptions without asking too many questions. He'd use my insurance and ID. I was terrified of what he'd do if I refused. She pulled up her sleeves, revealing bruises in various stages of healing on both arms. This is from last week when I told him I was scared about getting caught. He said no one would ever believe me if I told them I was being forced. He said I was the one whose name was on the prescriptions, so I'd be the one going to jail. Detective Chen documented the injuries with photos. How many prescriptions have you obtained for him? I don't know. Maybe 20? 30? Different pharmacies, different doctors. Always pain pills or sleeping pills. He'd give me instructions, what to say, what symptoms to describe. If I messed up, he'd hurt me. Why didn't you go to the police before? Chen asked gently. Jessica laughed bitterly. He's a software engineer, makes 6 figures, has a nice apartment, nice car. I'm a waitress with no family nearby and friends he made me cut off. Who would believe me? He said if I ever told anyone, he'd show them the prescriptions in my name and I'd go to prison for drug trafficking. And then he'd kill me anyway. She looked at Michael. Today was supposed to be the last one. He said we'd gotten enough and we were done. I was so relieved. But when we pulled up to the pharmacy and I saw you behind the counter, something made me hope. I don't know. I hoped maybe someone would finally notice something was wrong. Michael felt a lump in his throat. I'm glad I did. Detective Chen turned to Michael. You said the prescription looks suspicious. Walk me through what alerted you. Michael explained. The massive quantity of sedatives for a first-time patient, the doctor he couldn't reach, Jessica's nervous behavior, the bruises, the comment about he said you'd fill it, the man watching from the car. Any one of those things alone might not mean much, Michael said. But all of them together, my instincts told me something was very wrong. Chen nodded. Your instincts were right. We found more prescriptions in Brandon Walsh's apartment, all in Jessica's name, from different doctors filled at different pharmacies. He's been running a prescription drug trafficking operation using her as a front. And based on text messages we found on his phone, he was planning to kill her tonight, once she got him this final prescription. Jessica gasped. Michael felt sick. He told his friend, we have the texts, that Jessica had become too risky, and knew too much. He was going to use the sedatives he made her get to overdose her, and make it look like suicide. Your refusal to fill that prescription, Mr. Torres, didn't just stop a drug crime, you saved her life. Over the next several days, as police investigated Brandon Walsh's operation, the full scope of his crimes emerged.
He'd been using Jessica and 2 other women he'd coerced into relationships to obtain prescription medications illegally. He'd then sell the pills on the black market for thousands of dollars in profit. All 3 women had been abused, threatened, and trapped in relationships they couldn't escape. Brandon had carefully chosen vulnerable women, no close family, financial instability, past trauma, who he could control and manipulate. The other 2 women came forward once they learned Brandon had been arrested. Their stories were similar to Jessica's: initial charm followed by isolation, control, threats, and forced participation in obtaining prescriptions. He was systematic about it. Detective Chen explained to Michael during a follow-up interview. He'd establish romantic relationships with vulnerable women, gain access to their insurance and identification, then coerce them into doctor shopping for controlled substances. He'd research which doctors prescribed liberally, coach the women on what symptoms to report, and rotate through pharmacies so no one would notice a pattern. How long had this been going on? Michael asked. We're still piecing it together, but at least 3 years. He's made probably close to $200,000 selling prescription medications. And when women became too risky or threatened to go to the police, he'd threaten them, or in one case we're investigating, possibly killed them. Michael felt sick. Someone died? We're looking into the death of a woman who was Brandon's girlfriend 2 years ago, officially ruled a suicide by drug overdose. But the circumstances now look suspicious. Same pattern, prescriptions in her name, signs of abuse. Then suddenly she's dead from an overdose of medications she'd been prescribed. We're reopening that case. Chen looked at Michael seriously. Mr. Torres, what you did stopped a serial criminal. More than that, you saved Jessica's life and potentially prevented him from hurting the other women he was controlling. Your willingness to trust your instincts and get involved made all the difference. But Michael didn't feel heroic. He felt haunted by a question. How many times had pharmacists filled prescriptions for Jessica or the other women and not noticed anything wrong? How many times had healthcare providers seen the signs and not acted? He started reviewing his own pharmacy's records, looking for patterns he might have missed. Were there other Jessicas out there that he'd failed to notice? Michael's review of pharmacy records revealed something disturbing. Over the past 3 years, they'd filled 17 prescriptions for Jessica Morgan, all from different doctors, all for controlled substances. Michael had personally filled 4 of them and hadn't noticed anything unusual. He felt like he'd failed. The signs had been there, but he'd missed them because each individual prescription seemed legitimate in isolation. It was only when you looked at the pattern, multiple doctors, frequent refills, escalating quantities, that the red flags became obvious. Michael brought his findings to his pharmacy manager and to Detective Chen. I missed it, he said, his voice heavy with guilt. She came in 4 times before, and I didn't see what was happening. You weren't looking for a pattern, Chen said. Individual pharmacists filling individual prescriptions can't see the whole picture. That's a systemic problem. She was right. The healthcare system was fragmented. Different doctors didn't communicate with each other. Different pharmacies didn't share information. Someone could easily doctor shop and pharmacy shop without anyone noticing. But Michael couldn't shake his guilt. Jessica had been trapped in an abusive, dangerous situation for years, and she'd been standing right in front of him multiple times, asking for help in the only way she could, through her behavior, her fear, her visible distress, and he'd missed it. He visited Jessica at the domestic violence shelter where she was staying. I'm sorry, he told her. You came to my pharmacy before, and I didn't see what was happening. I failed you. Jessica shook her head. You didn't fail me. Brandon was good at this. He coached me on how to act normal. He'd hurt me if I showed any signs of distress. I was terrified every time I went to a pharmacy, but I was even more terrified of what he'd do if I didn't get the pills. She touched Michael's hand. You didn't fail me. You saved me. On the 4th visit, you finally noticed. That's more than anyone else did. My doctors didn't notice. The other pharmacists didn't notice. My neighbors who heard him hitting me didn't call the police. But you noticed, and you acted. That's what matters. Her words helped, but Michael remained troubled. How many other women were out there being coerced like Jessica? How many were too scared or too controlled to show obvious signs of distress? He decided to do something about it. Michael approached his pharmacy manager with a proposal. Develop a training program for pharmacists on recognizing signs of coercion and abuse in prescription drug crimes. Pharmacists are on the front lines, Michael argued. We see patients getting prescriptions, but we're not trained to recognize when they're being forced or manipulated into obtaining those prescriptions. We need to know what to look for. His manager agreed and helped Michael connect with law enforcement and domestic violence organizations to develop comprehensive training. The program Michael created covered signs of coercion in pharmacy settings. Patient seems nervous, frightened, or under duress. Someone waiting in car meeting outside, who patient keeps checking on. Patient has prescriptions from multiple doctors in short time frames. Escalating quantities or dosages. Patient seems unaware of what medication they're picking up. Visible injuries or signs of abuse. Someone else answering questions for the patient. Patient desperately insisting prescription must be filled immediately. References to someone else. He needs this. He said you'd fill it. What pharmacist should do. Trust your instincts if something feels wrong. Ask to speak with patient privately. Ask direct questions about safety. Document concerns. Contact law enforcement if there's immediate danger. Refuse to fill suspicious prescriptions. Report to prescription drug monitoring programs. Legal protections. Pharmacists have professional obligation to refuse suspicious prescriptions. Legal immunity when reporting in good faith. Professional duty to protect patient safety. Michael piloted the program at his own pharmacy. then expanded to other locations in the pharmacy chain. The response was overwhelming. Pharmacists were hungry for this kind of training. Many shared stories of prescriptions that had seemed off, but they hadn't known what to do about it. Within 6 months, Michael's training had been implemented across the entire pharmacy chain, over 300 locations in Georgia. Within a year, other chains were adopting similar programs nationwide, and it worked. In the first year after implementation, Pharmacist reported 89 cases of suspected coercion or abuse related to prescriptions. Of those, 34 were confirmed cases of domestic violence or prescription fraud, leading to 28 arrests and multiple victims being connected with support services. "You've created something important," Detective Chen told Michael. "You're teaching healthcare providers to see patterns they've been missing. Every pharmacist who completes this training becomes another set of eyes watching for victims who need help." Jessica's recovery was neither quick nor easy. She had PTSD from years of abuse. She had anxiety about going in public, convinced Brandon would find her even though he was in jail. She had financial problems from years of Brandon controlling her money. She had trust issues that made it hard to form new relationships, but she was determined to rebuild her life. With help from victim services, Jessica found a job at a nonprofit organization. She started therapy to process her trauma. She reconnected with friends and family she'd been cut off from. She testified at Brandon's trial, her voice shaking but steady as she described years of abuse and coercion. Brandon Walsh was convicted on multiple charges: prescription fraud, drug trafficking, domestic violence, coercion, and attempted murder. He was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. The other 2 women he'd been coercing also testified. One of them, Maria Santos, had been in an even more dangerous situation. Brandon had threatened to report her to immigration authorities. She was undocumented if she didn't cooperate. His conviction freed her from that fear. A year after her rescue, Jessica visited Michael at the pharmacy. She looked different, healthier, more confident, with light in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "I wanted to thank you again," she said, "and I wanted to show you something." She pulled up her sleeve, revealing a tattoo on her wrist where the bruises used to be. It was a simple design, a prescription symbol with a heart inside it. "This is to remind me," Jessica explained, "that sometimes help comes from unexpected places, that someone paying attention can save a life, that I'm not defined by what happened to me, but by how I survived it." She smiled. "And I'm starting pharmacy school next semester. I want to be like you, someone who sees people, not just prescriptions, someone who pays attention to the details, someone who has the courage to act when something feels wrong." Michael felt tears in his eyes. "Jessica, that's wonderful. You'll be an amazing pharmacist." "I hope so," she said, "because I want to be the person for someone else that you were for me. The person who notices, who cares, who refuses to just fill a prescription and ignore what's really happening." Jessica's case and Michael's training program caught the attention of state legislators. The Georgia Senate held hearings on prescription drug diversion and coercion, inviting Michael and Jessica to testify. "Current systems focus on preventing people from getting prescriptions they shouldn't have," Michael explained to the legislative committee. "But they don't address situations where people are being forced to get prescriptions they don't want. We need better tools for identifying and helping victims of coercion." He proposed several systemic changes: enhanced prescription drug monitoring programs that flag concerning patterns, direct communication channels between pharmacies and law enforcement, legal protections for pharmacists who refuse suspicious prescriptions, resources for victims identified through pharmacy interventions. Jessica testified about her experience, her voice strong despite the difficulty of recounting her trauma. "I walked into pharmacies dozens of times hoping someone would notice I was in trouble. Most people didn't, but Mr. Torres did, and that saved my life. Every pharmacist should be trained to see what he saw." The committee was moved. Within 6 months, Georgia passed the Pharmacy Vigilance Act, requiring all licensed pharmacists in the state to complete annual training on recognizing signs of coercion and abuse. The law also created a dedicated hotline for pharmacists to report concerns and receive guidance. Other states began adopting similar legislation. Within 2 years, 15 states had implemented mandatory training programs based on Michael's model. The National Association of Boards of Pharmacy adopted Michael's training as a recommended best practice nationwide. Major pharmacy chains incorporated it into their standard employee training. "You've changed how an entire profession approaches patient safety," said Dr. Rebecca Hall, a healthcare policy expert studying the impact of Michael's work. "Pharmacists have always been taught to prevent drug diversion and abuse, but you taught them to also watch for victims, people being coerced or manipulated into obtaining medications. That's a fundamental shift in perspective." 2 years after saving Jessica, Michael received a call from a pharmacist in Oregon. "Mr. Torres, my name is David Kim. I completed your training program last year. Yesterday a situation came up that was almost identical to what you described. Nervous patient, someone waiting in a car outside, prescription that seemed off. Because of your training, I knew what to look for. I called the police. We found out the woman was being sex trafficked, and her trafficker was forcing her to get prescription drugs to sell. We saved her. I wanted to thank you." That was the first call, but it wasn't the last. Over the next year, Michael received dozens of similar calls and emails, pharmacists across the country who had recognized coercion or abuse because of his training and had intervened. Each story was different, but the pattern was the same: a pharmacist noticing something wrong, trusting their instincts, and taking action. The documented cases included 47 domestic violence situations identified through pharmacy interactions, 23 cases of prescription fraud involving coerced individual, 8 human trafficking victims identified when traffickers forced them to obtain prescriptions, 34 elderly abuse cases where family members were exploiting victims' prescriptions. In total, over 100 people were identified as victims and connected with help directly because pharmacists had been trained to recognize signs of coercion. But those are just the confirmed cases, Michael told a conference of healthcare professionals. How many more victims were helped in ways we'll never know about? How many pharmacists had conversations with patients that led them to seek help on their own? How many potential abusers were deterred because they knew pharmacists were paying attention? We can't measure those impacts, but I believe they're significant. Michael's work expanded beyond pharmacies. He partnered with medical schools to develop similar training for physicians. He worked with nurses' associations to teach healthcare providers in hospitals and clinics to recognize signs of coercion. He collaborated with dentists who sometimes saw patients obtaining prescriptions under duress. Healthcare providers see patients in vulnerable moments, Michael explained. We have opportunities to notice what others miss, but only if we're trained to look for it and empowered to act on what we see. But the work took its toll on Michael. The constant reminders of abuse, the stories from other pharmacists about victims they'd identified, the knowledge that for every person saved there were likely many more still trapped, it weighed on him. He started having trouble sleeping. He'd lie awake thinking about all the prescriptions he'd filled over 20 years that might have been coerced, all the patients he might have failed to notice, all the Jessicas who had stood at his counter asking for help in ways too subtle for him to see. His wife Maria noticed his exhaustion and stress. "You're carrying too much," she told him. "You saved Jessica. You created training that saved over 100 more people. You've done something incredible. But you can't save everyone, Michael. You can't fix every broken part of the healthcare system. You have to take care of yourself too." Michael knew she was right, but knowing it and actually practicing self-care were different things. Every email from a pharmacist who'd identified a victim brought both relief and guilt. Relief that someone was helped, guilt that there were so many more who needed help. He started seeing a therapist who specialized in secondary trauma, the kind of trauma that comes from repeated exposure to others' suffering. "You're experiencing compassion fatigue," his therapist, Dr. James Morrison, explained. "You care deeply about helping people, which is admirable, but you're absorbing their trauma. You're carrying not just Jessica's story, but the stories of every victim you learn about. That's not sustainable." Dr. Morrison helped Michael develop boundaries, limiting how many victim stories he read, taking breaks from advocacy work, engaging in activities unrelated to his mission. It was hard. Every time Michael took a day off, he'd think about victims who didn't get days off from their suffering. But gradually, Michael learned that sustainable advocacy required taking care of himself, that he couldn't help anyone if he burned out completely, that setting boundaries wasn't selfish, it was necessary.
3 years after Jessica's rescue, Michael received a surprising email. It was from Dr. Robert Patterson, the physician whose name had been on Jessica's suspicious prescription. "Mr. Torres, I recently learned about the case involving Jessica Morgan and the prescription that bore my name. I want you to know that prescription was forged. Brandon Walsh somehow obtained my DEA number and created a fake prescription. I never wrote it, never saw Ms. Morgan as a patient. But what troubles me is that Walsh was able to forge my credentials so easily, and it makes me wonder, how many other prescriptions have been forged using my information? How many other victims are out there? I'd like to work with you on addressing this vulnerability in the prescription system. Would you be willing to meet?" Michael was skeptical at first. Patterson could be trying to cover himself. But Detective Chen confirmed that Patterson's DEA information had indeed been stolen and used to create multiple fake prescriptions. Michael agreed to meet. Dr. Patterson turned out to be genuinely concerned about the security vulnerabilities in the prescription system that had allowed Walsh to forge prescriptions so easily. "The current system relies on pieces of paper with signatures that can be easily faked," Patterson explained, "or electronic systems that can be hacked. We need better security, biometric verification, blockchain technology, real-time verification between prescribers and pharmacies." Together, Michael and Dr. Patterson developed a proposal for a secure electronic prescription system that would make forgery nearly impossible. The system would require multi-factor authentication for prescribers, real-time verification between doctor's office and pharmacy, biometric confirmation for controlled substances, automatic flagging of patterns suggesting fraud or coercion, direct communication channels between pharmacies and prescribers. They presented their proposal to the Georgia Board of Pharmacy and the State Medical Board. The response was cautiously optimistic. The technology existed, but implementing it across an entire state would be expensive and complex. But pilot programs were launched in several healthcare systems. Within a year, those systems reported significant reductions in prescription fraud and easier identification of concerning patterns. "This doesn't just prevent forgery," Michael pointed out. "It also makes it easier to spot coercion. If a patient is getting prescriptions from multiple doctors in short timeframes, the system flags it automatically. If quantities are escalating suspiciously, pharmacists are alerted. We're using technology to do what individual healthcare providers can't do alone. See the whole picture. When Jessica graduated from pharmacy school 4 years after her rescue, Michael was in the audience. She'd finished at the top of her class, earned multiple scholarships, and already had a job lined up at a hospital pharmacy that specialized in addiction treatment. At her graduation party, Jessica gave a speech that brought everyone to tears. 4 years ago, I walked into a pharmacy convinced I was going to die that night. I was trapped in an abusive relationship with a man who was forcing me to get prescription medications for him. He'd threatened to kill me, and I believed him. I had no hope, no way out, no one to help me. But someone did help me. A pharmacist named Michael Torres noticed something was wrong. He trusted his instincts. He asked uncomfortable questions. He called the police. He saved my life. I'm standing here today, alive, free, about to start my career as a pharmacist, because one person paid attention, because one person cared enough to get involved, because one person refused to just fill a prescription and ignore what was really happening. I want to be that person for someone else. I want to be the pharmacist who sees beyond the prescription to the person standing in front of me, who recognizes when someone is in trouble, who has the courage to act even when it's uncomfortable. Mr. Torres didn't just save my life, he inspired me to spend my life saving others. And I know I'm not the only one. There are over 100 confirmed cases of victims being identified and helped because pharmacists completed the training he developed. There are probably thousands more we'll never know about. That's the power of one person who pays attention, one person who acts, one person who refuses to look away. She turned to face Michael directly. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for saving me. Thank you for teaching others to do the same. You changed my life, and through me and through your training you've changed countless other lives. That's a legacy to be proud of. Jessica wasn't the only one inspired by Michael's work. Pharmacy students across the country were requesting his training as part of their education. Pharmacy schools were incorporating victim recognition and response into their curricula. Michael was invited to speak at pharmacy schools regularly. He'd stand before rooms full of eager young students and tell them, "You're entering a profession where you'll interact with thousands of people. Most of those interactions will be routine. People getting antibiotics or blood pressure medication, or diabetes supplies. But occasionally, you'll encounter someone who desperately needs help but can't ask for it directly. Someone being coerced by an abusive partner, someone being trafficked, someone being exploited by a family member, someone trapped in a situation they can't escape. Your job isn't just to fill prescriptions, it's to see people, to pay attention, to recognize when something's not right." He'd show Jessica's prescription, the one that had started everything, with identifying information redacted. This looked legitimate on paper, licensed doctor, appropriate dosage, properly formatted. But something was wrong. The patient's behavior, the quantity, the circumstances. Trust those instincts. Michael would emphasize the key lesson. You have more power than you realize. A pharmacist can refuse to fill a prescription. A pharmacist can call authorities. A pharmacist can intervene when no one else is in a position to notice. Use that power responsibly. Use it to protect people. Students would approach him after presentations with their own stories, family members who'd been abused, friends who'd been coerced, situations they'd witnessed and didn't know how to respond to. Michael would listen, provide guidance, remind them that awareness was the first step toward creating change. One student, Sarah Kim, told him, "My mom was in an abusive relationship when I was growing up. No one noticed, or if they did, they didn't say anything. She finally escaped, but it took years. If someone, a pharmacist, a doctor, anyone had paid attention and offered help earlier, maybe she wouldn't have suffered so long." Sarah continued, "That's why I'm going into pharmacy. I want to be someone who pays attention, who sees what others miss, who has the courage to act. You've shown me that's possible." Stories like Sarah's reminded Michael why the work mattered, even when it was exhausting and emotionally draining. 5 years after saving Jessica, Michael was invited to keynote the National Community Pharmacist Association annual conference. Standing before 2,000 pharmacists from across the country, he felt the weight of what that moment represented. 5 years ago, Michael began, I was just a community pharmacist in Atlanta, filling prescriptions like I'd done for 20 years. Then a nervous young woman handed me a prescription that didn't feel right. I could have filled it. Everything was technically legal, but my instincts told me something was wrong. So I acted on those instincts, and that decision saved a life. He told Jessica's story, the full arc from that first suspicious prescription to her graduation from pharmacy school, from victim to advocate, from desperation to hope. But Jessica's story isn't unique, Michael continued. It's being repeated across this country right now. Someone is walking into a pharmacy somewhere, terrified, being coerced, desperately hoping someone will notice. The question is, will you be the pharmacist who sees them? Michael displayed statistics. Over 400,000 pharmacists had completed his training program. 847 documented cases of coercion or abuse identified through pharmacy interventions. 312 arrests of individuals forcing others to obtain prescriptions. Over 600 victims connected with support services. But I believe the real number is much higher, Michael said.
These are just the documented cases. How many quiet conversations happened between pharmacists and patients that led to someone seeking help? How many potential abusers were deterred because they knew pharmacists were watching? How many people are safer today because pharmacists have been trained to pay attention? He paused, looking around the room. Every single person in this room has the power to save a life, not through dramatic interventions necessarily, but through observation, through asking questions, through trusting instincts, through refusing to fill suspicious prescriptions, through calling authorities when something feels wrong. Michael clicked to his next slide, a photo of Jessica in her pharmacy white coat at her graduation. This is what's possible when we pay attention. This young woman was trapped, terrified, convinced she was going to die. Today she's a pharmacist helping others. She survived because one person noticed, one person acted, one person refused to look away. He looked directly at the audience. Be that person. For someone out there right now, you might be their only hope. Don't miss the signs. Don't talk yourself out of acting. Don't let fear of being wrong stop you from potentially being right. Trust your instincts and act on them. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. Afterward, dozens of pharmacists approached Michael with their own stories, interventions they'd made, victims they'd helped, situations where training had prepared them to recognize and respond to coercion. One pharmacist, Robert Chen from Seattle, told him, "I had a Jessica situation 6 months ago. Elderly man getting massive quantities of pain medication, his adult son always with him, similar concerning signs. Because of your training, I recognized what was happening. Elder abuse. The son was forcing his father to get prescriptions so he could sell the pills. The father is safe now, living with his daughter. Your training saved him." Story after story, Michael heard how the work had rippled outward, creating a network of aware, empowered pharmacists who were protecting vulnerable people every day. But Michael knew individual awareness wasn't enough. Systems needed to change to make it harder for abusers and traffickers to exploit victims through prescription fraud. He worked with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention to develop enhanced prescription drug monitoring program, PDMP protocols. The improvements included enhanced pattern recognition, algorithms that flagged concerning patterns automatically, real-time alerts to pharmacists when suspicious prescriptions were presented, door integration across state lines to catch doctor shopping across borders, identification of prescribers who wrote suspicious prescription patterns, easier reporting, one-click reporting from pharmacy systems to law enforcement, anonymous tip lines for healthcare providers with concerns, streamlined processes for reporting suspected coercion, protection from liability for good faith reports, victim support integration, automatic connection to victim services when coercion identified, resources for pharmacists to provide to potential victims, trauma-informed approaches to victim interviews, safety planning for victims still living with abusers, provider training, training for law enforcement on pharmacy-based victim identification, coordinated response protocols between healthcare and criminal justice systems. The enhanced systems launched as pilot programs in 10 states. Within the first year, those states reported 34% increase in identification of prescription fraud, 156 cases of coercion or abuse identified through pharmacy alerts, 89 arrests of individuals exploiting others for prescriptions, significantly faster response times when victims were identified. The technology enables what humans sometimes miss, explained Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a health policy expert working with Michael. But it's the combination of technology and trained aware pharmacists that makes the real difference. The system flags concerning patterns, but it's the pharmacist who recognizes the human signs of distress and takes action. 6 years after Jessica's rescue, Michael faced his biggest challenge yet. A prominent advocacy group accused his training program of creating a climate of suspicion and paranoia that was harming innocent patients. The group, called Patients' Privacy Rights Alliance, argued that pharmacists trained in Michael's methods were becoming overly suspicious, questioning legitimate patients, refusing valid prescriptions, and treating people like criminals based on subjective instincts. They presented several cases. A chronic pain patient, whose prescription was refused by a pharmacist who thought she seemed nervous. An elderly man who was questioned extensively because he had multiple prescriptions from different specialists. A woman with anxiety disorder who was treated suspiciously because she appeared nervous picking up her medication. Michael Torres has created a system where pharmacists play detective instead of filling prescriptions, the group spokesperson said in a press conference. Legitimate patients are being stigmatized and denied care because of subjective judgments about their behavior. Michael took the criticism seriously. He reviewed each case the group presented and acknowledged that yes, there had been instances where pharmacists misapplied the training or made poor judgments. "I don't deny that mistakes have been made," Michael said in response. "Anytime you train hundreds of thousands of people to look for concerning patterns, some will be overzealous or misinterpret signs. That's unfortunate, and we need to address it." He worked with the advocacy group to refine the training, adding more emphasis on distinguishing between legitimate nervousness and signs of coercion, understanding that chronic pain patients often have complex prescription histories, recognizing that anxiety disorders naturally make people appear nervous, avoiding judgments based on appearance or assumptions, balancing vigilance with respect for patient autonomy. The goal is never to deny legitimate patients their needed medications, Michael clarified in updated training materials. The goal is to recognize when someone is being forced or manipulated into obtaining prescriptions against their will. Those are different situations requiring different responses. The revised training included case studies showing both appropriate and inappropriate applications of the concepts. It emphasized that suspicion should be based on multiple concrete factors, not single subjective impressions. I'd rather acknowledge our mistakes and improve than pretend we're perfect, Michael told his wife. If some legitimate patients have been inconvenienced or treated poorly, that's a real problem we need to fix. But that doesn't mean we should stop training pharmacists to recognize coercion. We just need to do it better. The advocacy group appreciated Michael's willingness to engage with their concerns. Together they developed guidelines that balanced victim protection with patient rights, creating a more nuanced approach that protected vulnerable people while respecting legitimate patients. 7 years after saving Jessica, Michael received a call from the White House. He was being awarded the Presidential Citizens Medal for his work in prescription fraud prevention and victim advocacy. Standing in the East Room of the White House, Michael felt surreal as the president placed the medal around his neck. Michael Torres represents the best of America, the president said. A community pharmacist who saw something wrong and refused to look away, who saved one life then dedicated himself to teaching others to do the same, who has helped protect hundreds of victims and inspired systemic changes that will protect thousands more. The ceremony was attended by Jessica, now working as a clinical pharmacist at a major hospital, by Maria Santos and the other women who'd been rescued from Brandon Walsh's operation, by dozens of pharmacists who'd completed Michael's training and used it to identify victims, by law enforcement officers and victim advocates who'd partnered in the work. After the ceremony, a reporter asked Michael, "How does it feel to be a national hero?" Michael shook his head. "I'm not a hero. I'm a pharmacist who paid attention one time and then tried to teach others to do the same. The real heroes are the victims who survived and found the courage to rebuild their lives. The pharmacists who make the choice every day to see people, not just prescriptions. The advocates and law enforcement officers who do the hard work of protecting vulnerable people." He gestured to Jessica. "She's the hero. She survived years of abuse, had the courage to testify, rebuilt her life, became a pharmacist herself, and now helps others every day. That's heroism. I just noticed something was wrong and made a phone call." But Jessica shook her head. "You did more than make a phone call. You trusted your instincts when it would have been easier to ignore them. You acted when others would have stayed silent. You created something that saved hundreds of lives. That matters, Michael. That really matters." But Michael wasn't done. He'd identified a new problem. Healthcare workers in hospitals and clinics were encountering similar situations, but had even less training than pharmacists in recognizing coercion. He partnered with the American Nurses Association to develop coercion recognition for healthcare providers, a comprehensive training program for nurses, physicians, and other clinical staff. The training covered different scenarios: emergency room staff, identifying trafficking victims; primary care providers recognizing domestic violence; hospital pharmacists noticing suspicious prescription patterns; nurses observing concerning family dynamics; physicians detecting elder abuse. Healthcare providers see patients in crisis moments, Michael explained at the program launch. Emergency rooms, doctors' offices, hospitals, these are places where victims might have brief opportunities to seek help, but only if someone notices and knows how to respond. The program was piloted at 20 hospitals across the country. Within 6 months, those hospitals reported identifying 67 cases of coercion, abuse, or trafficking that likely would have been missed without the training. Stories emerged. An ER nurse who recognized that a young woman's boyfriend was actually her trafficker, a physician who identified elder financial abuse when an elderly patient's son insisted on being present for all medical discussions, a hospital social worker who noticed signs of coercion when a patient seemed terrified of her husband, a clinic nurse who identified domestic violence through a patient's behavioral changes. "Every healthcare interaction is a potential intervention opportunity," said Dr. Patricia Coleman, chief medical officer at one pilot hospital, "but only if our staff are trained to see what's hidden." Michael's program gives them those skills. 10 years after saving Jessica, Michael was invited back to Midtown Pharmacy for a special ceremony. The pharmacy chain was naming their annual employee award after him, the Michael Torres Vigilance Award for pharmacists who demonstrated exceptional awareness and advocacy for patients. The first recipient was a pharmacist named Angela Martinez, who had identified and helped 3 coercion victims in the past year. "I completed Mr. Torres's training 5 years ago," Angela said at the ceremony. "It changed how I see my job. I'm not just filling prescriptions anymore. I'm watching for people who need help. I'm paying attention to signs others might miss. I'm being the person Mr. Torres was for Jessica, someone who notices and acts." Jessica, now working as a clinical pharmacy specialist, was also there. She'd been invited to speak about her journey. 10 years ago, I walked into this pharmacy terrified and hopeless," Jessica told the gathered crowd. "I was convinced I was going to die that night. Mr. Torres saved my life by paying attention, trusting his instincts, and refusing to fill a prescription that didn't feel right." She paused, emotion evident in her voice. but he did more than save my life. He showed me what's possible when we pay attention to each other, when we care about strangers, when we act even when it's uncomfortable. He inspired me to become a pharmacist so I could do the same for others. Jessica looked at Michael. I've been a pharmacist for 3 years now. In that time, I've identified 2 situations similar to what I experienced, people being coerced into getting prescriptions. Both times I knew what to look for because I'd lived it, and because you'd trained me. Both people are safe now. Both are rebuilding their lives, like I rebuilt mine. She smiled through tears. That's the legacy of one person paying attention 10 years ago. 1 life saved becoming 2 lives saved becoming hundreds. The ripple never stops, Mr. Torres. It just keeps spreading. That night, Michael sat with his wife Maria on their porch, reflecting on a decade of work that had started with 1 suspicious prescription. Do you ever think about what would have happened if you'd just filled that prescription? Maria asked. If you'd ignored your instincts that day. Michael had thought about it many times. Jessica would probably be dead. Brandon would still be operating, coercing other women. Hundreds of victims identified through the training program would still be trapped. The systems we've helped change wouldn't exist. He paused. But I also think about all the Jessicas I missed before I learned to pay attention. All the victims who stood at my counter asking for help in ways too subtle for me to notice. Those haunt me still. Maria took his hand. You can't save everyone. You can't notice everything. But you saved Jessica. You created systems that saved hundreds more. You trained hundreds of thousands of people to pay attention. That's not nothing, Michael. That's extraordinary. But he also knew the work would never feel finished. Somewhere right now, someone was being coerced. Someone was trapped. Someone was desperate for help. The question was, would someone notice? Would someone act? Michael had spent 10 years trying to increase the odds that the answer would be yes. Training pharmacists, developing systems, changing policies, creating a culture of awareness. It wasn't perfect. Mistakes had been made. Some victims still fell through the cracks. But it was better than before. More people were watching. More were trained to recognize signs. More had the courage to act. That had to be enough. It had to be. The next morning, Michael returned to work at Midtown Pharmacy. Despite all the awards and recognition, despite the national training programs and policy changes, he'd never stopped working as a community pharmacist. It kept him grounded, reminded him why the work mattered. As he prepared for the day, Michael thought about all the prescriptions he'd fill today. Most would be routine, antibiotics, blood pressure medications, diabetes supplies, normal people getting normal care. But maybe, just maybe, someone would walk in who needed more than a prescription filled. Someone who needed to be seen. Someone who needed an advocate. Someone like Jessica 10 years ago. And if that happened, Michael would be ready. He'd pay attention. He'd trust his instincts. He'd act even if it was uncomfortable. Because he'd learned 10 years ago that one person paying attention could change everything. Michael pulled out his phone and typed a message to post on the training program's website. Dear healthcare providers, 10 years ago today, a young woman walked into my pharmacy with a prescription that didn't feel right. I could have filled it and moved on to the next customer. Everything was technically legal, but my instincts told me something was wrong. I listened to those instincts. I asked questions. I called the police. And that decision saved a life. But it did more than that. It sparked a journey that's led to training hundreds of thousands of healthcare providers to recognize and respond to coercion. It's led to hundreds of documented rescues and likely many more we'll never know about. It's led to systemic changes that protect vulnerable people. All because one person paid attention one time. Today, somewhere, someone is in danger. Someone is being coerced. Someone is desperately hoping that a healthcare provider will notice something wrong and act on it. That someone might walk into your pharmacy, your clinic, your hospital today. Will you be the person who notices? Who trusts their instincts? Who has the courage to act? You don't need special skills. You don't need to be a hero. You just need to pay attention. To see people, not just patients. To trust when something feels wrong. To act even when it's uncomfortable. One prescription saved one life. That one life inspired training that saved hundreds more. Those hundreds inspired systemic changes that will protect thousands. The ripple never stops spreading. Be the person who starts the ripple. Be the one who notices. Be the one who acts. Because somewhere, right now, someone's life depends on whether you pay attention. With vigilance and hope, Michael Torres. He posted the message, then opened the pharmacy for the day. The first customer was an elderly woman picking up her heart medication. Normal. Routine. The second was a young man getting antibiotics. Normal. Routine. The third was a middle-aged woman who seemed nervous, kept looking at the door, clutched a prescription for sedatives with white knuckles. Michael's instincts activated. He looked closer, saw the fear in her eyes, saw the way she flinched when the door opened, saw the bruise barely covered by makeup on her cheek. He took the prescription and made eye contact with her. I need to verify some information. Can you wait just a moment? The woman nodded, relief and terror warring in her expression. Michael picked up the phone, his hand steady, his purpose clear. 10 years later, he was still paying attention, still trusting his instincts, still refusing to look away, because that's what it took. One person, one moment, one choice to care. Every single day. This story is dedicated to every pharmacist, nurse, physician, and healthcare provider who has ever trusted their instincts and acted to protect a vulnerable patient. Your vigilance saves lives. Your willingness to see beyond prescriptions and diagnoses to the people in front of you makes all the difference. Thank you for paying attention.
Thank you very much for listening. Please let us know what you think of this story in the comments. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any other videos.